2,660 years ago, in 640 BCE, an 8-year-old child ascended to the throne of the southern Israelite kingdom of Judah, following the revolt against and the assassination of his idolatrous father. That young boy, Josiah, became the 16th king of Judah. The book of 2 Chronicles tells us that in the 18th year of his reign, as Josiah was overseeing the restoration of the temple, a scroll of the law was discovered. The exact content of this scroll is uncertain, but many think it to have been some version of Deuteronomy, or perhaps an early version of what would become the Torah. The king had the scroll read to him and immediately fell into despair and deep mourning, realizing the extent to which he had failed to live up to the ethic of leadership depicted there. What were these teachings that caused Josiah such distress? Well, I think we can guess. We know that vital to Deuteronomy's moral instruction is the obligation to care for the widow, the orphan, the stranger. And as you are likely well aware by now, no less than 36 times is this obligation decreed in the book of Deuteronomy. What was likely revealed to Josiah were instructions for the building of a nation where empathy is a foundational value, where all, regardless of political, economic, or social status, are recognized, cared for, and have implicit worth. Josiah realized that as a leader, he had failed in his most basic responsibility to his people. Rising from his mourning, he immediately initiated a program of reforms, transforming both the nature of his leadership and instituting religious, political, and social changes in order to reflect the ethics and values found in this scroll, in our scroll. Josiah strove to build the promised land that he understood from this scroll to be his obligation. For his personal transformation and the reformation of his kingdom, King Josiah is considered to be one of the great kings of the ancient Israelite nation. Some 2,400 years later, this scroll once again played a vital role in defining the direction of a nation. Over several sweltering days at the end of June and beginning of July, in the midst of growing political chaos and civil unrest, leaders from every region of the land gathered together. They represented a wide range of views and opinions. They were often in vehement disagreement with each other. At times it seemed that their meeting would come to no productive end. But ultimately, they came to realize that what they shared in common was so much more significant than their disagreements. They agreed on a path forward, defined in great part by the words of that ancient scroll. And on July 4th, 1776, they signed a document memorializing their vision. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. With these words, our nation's founding document rings forth its biblical lineage. They reflect one of the foundational principles of that ancient scroll, an idea that by now you all know so well, Tselem Elohim, that we are each created equally in God's image. Like the ancient Israelite king, our nation's ancestors understood that there are certain divinely ordained, inalienable rights that are not subject to the whim of human rulers. Our founders saw democracy, with its fundamental commitment to equality, individual rights, and human dignity, as fundamentally rooted in the words of that ancient scroll. In addition to the Declaration of Independence, they also considered the design for a seal that would represent their new vision, represent their new nation. Not surprisingly, the original design came from the scroll. It was an adaptation of the breastplate worn by the high priest in the ancient temple. The breastplate included 12 uniquely colored stones, placed side by side as a reminder to the leaders of the ancient Jewish nation of both the uniqueness of each individual tribe and, at the same time, their unity in common cause and values as one nation. Like King Josiah 2 millennia earlier, our founders saw in the birth of this new nation the fulfillment of the biblical vision of unique and distinct tribes united in the building of a promised land. And the motto that was chosen for that seal expressed both their diversity and their unity. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Now, my intention in telling this story is not to whitewash, pun intended, the well-known imperfections of our nation's founders. They were profoundly human and certainly flawed in significant ways. As we know, the lives that many of them lived did not exemplify the values or the vision of the more perfect union they set forth in our nation's foundational document. But for me, that does not diminish in any way the vision of liberty and justice for all, which is their gift to us. Sadly, as the tragic events of this summer show, 244 years later, that vision remains an aspiration rather than a reality. In fact, it seems to me that we are moving in the opposite direction. Ex uno plurus. Out of one, we are becoming many. The flames of tribalism of which I spoke on Rosh Hashanah have been stoked into a conflagration as destructive to our nation as the wildfires we have suffered here on the West Coast. Smoldering embers of fear and distrust have been callously blown into a wildfire that is burning out of control and is devouring us. As author Robert Putnam recently wrote, we are more polarized as a nation than at any time since the late 19th century. He points out unprecedented political polarization, a fraying social fabric, public and private narcissism. Americans today, he suggests, can agree on only one thing. This is the worst of times. And frankly, it is hard to disagree. As we gather together on this Kol Nidre Eve, challenged by the teachings and reflections of this day to consider where we stand and what we stand for, we find ourselves facing some of the same questions that likely challenged both King Josiah and our founding fathers. What is the ethic upon which this nation will stand as it moves forward? What values will inform our nation's character? How might the morals and ethics of our scroll inform the choices we will make in the coming days? And when it comes our time to choose, will we, like King Josiah, like our nation's founders, take the words of our scroll to heart? Will we raise up to positions of leadership those who exemplify the vision of leadership inscribed in our most sacred scroll? Responding to Moses' example of leadership, a midrash on the book of Exodus offers us this instruction. As soon as one is appointed head of a community and dons the cloak of leadership, he or she must no longer say, I live for my own benefit. I don't care about the community. Rather, the whole burden of the community is on that person's shoulder. Whether the leader be divine or human, our scroll teaches an ethic that places the needs of the people first. The whole burden of the community is on that person's shoulder. Will we exercise our franchise in order to place into positions of leadership those who place the interests of the people first? Will we place in positions of leadership those who exhibit the profound sense of empathy that is the fundamental value underpinning Jewish ethics? Broadened empathy that is extended to all members of society, regardless of their color, red or blue, black, brown, or white, regardless of gender, sexual preference, economic condition, or social status. Our founders encapsulated the idea of broad empathy in their motto, E pluribus unum. Our tradition, as we have seen, expresses it in many, many ways, but none more powerful than the description of God that is particularly prominent in our liturgy at this time of year. Adonai, Adonai el rachum v'chanun, erech apain v'rav chesed v'emet. Adonai, Adonai, compassionate, gracious, patient, abounding in kindness and in honesty and forgiving. According to our scroll, these are the essential ingredients of empathy. They are also, as it turns out, the essential ingredients of leadership. After all, God is placed before us as the ideal, and a human leader's most significant obligation to his nation is to model these godly behaviors. To be an example of compassion and grace, patience, kindness, honesty, and forgiveness, and thereby setting the bar for the rest of us. As our scroll makes clear, this is the roadmap to the creation of a promised land. As the leader of his nation, Josiah's recognition that he had come up short in this regard led him to teshuvah. First acknowledging his own failings and then taking the steps necessary to repair that which was damaged. If we could only elicit such a response by reading the words of our scroll. Of course, we know that that is likely not going to happen. So the best we can do is take seriously our Jewish heritage, the ethic of our Jewish tradition. Read the words of the scroll as we will today, and then advocate for leadership that will take these words to heart and lead by the ideals expressed therein. The Talmud makes absolutely clear the consequences resulting from the failure of a nation and its leaders to live up to these ideals. No less than the destruction of the Second Temple is ascribed to the moral decay of the Israelite nation. It was not the military might of the Roman army, we are told, but rather sinat chinam, gratuitous hatred of one towards another, that led to the demise of the nation. Rotting from the inside out, the rabbis tell us the Israelite nation was ripe to be conquered. 2 millennia later, I sit here in my home office, which for the past 197 days has served as the University Synagogue Rabbinic Study. And I reflect on the Jewish ethic handed to us by the likes of King Josiah, by Moses, by our prophets and our sages, and most importantly, by God. An ethic of compassion, grace, patience, kindness, honesty, forgiveness, and lest we forget, tzedek, justice. And I reflect as well on how the tears in the seams of our nation's fabric have been laid bare over these past 6 months. Growing economic and social disparity, social division and anger and unrest, environmental disasters, an out-of-control pandemic, and a brutal and unprecedented assault on facts and science and truth that has made them all that much worse. It is difficult for me not to fall into Josiah's despair, as I witness the sinat chinam, the virus of baseless hatred growing into a pandemic across our nation. During these difficult days, the bright light in our home, our beacon of joy and hope, has been my granddaughter, Ruby. Born on the eve of the pandemic, she sometimes seems to be the only thing that's gone right in 2020. We are blessed that she is in our bubble. As a matter of fact, she's just leaving right now. We're so blessed to be able to see her a few times this week, each week. On multiple occasions, it is her bright blue eyes and her innocent smile that has lifted our sagging spirits. But to be honest, Ruby also causes me a great deal of concern. I wonder about the world we are leaving her, the world we are leaving for all of our children. I gaze out my office window at the orange sky, and I wonder, will this be the color of the sky that she will come to know? Will I have to tell her that it was once blue? What will the nature be of the society that she will join? Will it be one founded on compassion, grace, patience, kindness, honesty, forgiveness, and justice? Or defined by widening gaps and increasing divisions? Will she discover greater opportunity or growing disparity? Will there even be a true democracy in which she can participate? Will she be welcomed and accepted here as a Jew? A question that not so long ago would have never crossed my mind. I have to say, for me, the choices I make, the choices I will make, are no longer for me. They're for Ruby. I've had my opportunities. I've indeed been blessed, so blessed. But I worry about Ruby. Will she be similarly blessed? I'm afraid I'm not really sure. I know my choices are the legacy that I will leave her. And so I look to our scroll. I look as did King Josiah. And I hear the words of Deuteronomy that he did. Words we say on this day that it is my choice. And frankly, my choice is as clear and as obvious to me as it was to King Josiah 2,600 years ago. Uvacharta b'chayim, choose life. Lema'an tichya atav zarecha, so that you and your children may live by loving and obeying and staying close to Adonai, your God. King Josiah was moved by these words to transform his leadership and change the direction of his nation. 2,400 years later, our founders were similarly inspired as they created a new nation founded on human dignity and on liberty and justice for all. 2,600 years after Josiah, 244 years after the creation of this nation, will we too pay attention to the words that call out to us from that scroll? Words that call upon us this day to rise up towards acts upon the God and act upon the godly image in which we were created. Will we raise to positions of leadership those who in words and actions embody the words of that scroll? Leaders who will inspire us to be our best, to do our best, to create communities and neighborhoods and cities and states and a nation created in the image of a world of compassion, grace, patience, kindness, honesty, forgiveness, and justice. What will we choose? All summer we have been reading a beautiful poetic interpretation of the Aleinu. that reminds us that the word aleinu translates as "it is up to us." As this prayer we are about to recite reminds us, and as this day urges us to see, it is indeed up to us. It is our choice. Uvacharta b'chayim. Choose life. Create the world you want. Create the world we all want for ourselves, for our children, our grandchildren. A world of compassion, grace, patience, kindness, honesty, forgiveness. A world of liberty and justice for all. That bayom hahu yihye Adonai echad. On that day God will be one. Ushemo echad. And God's name will be one. Aleinu. It is up to us.